Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. It's almost the weekend. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a new segment that we're going to be starting. This is where you get to participate. I will be... There are no stupid questions. That's the name of the segment, right? Judaism is not a religion that says everything has to be done in a certain way, right? In fact, questioning is one of the most important aspects of Judaism, that we're not supposed to just blindly believe. We're not supposed to there's not the idea of blind faith in Judaism is not there. We're supposed to question everything, and you see that in the story of the Jewish people going through from Egypt. I mean, even Abraham arguing with God, right? The idea of Abraham arguing with God for Sodom and Gomorrah, saying, negotiating, even if there's negotiating all the way down to one righteous person, and God caved, right? It's an interesting story, right? So we have that conversation, and we see that Abraham, the father of monotheistic, all of the three monotheistic religions, challenged God, argued with God. That seems to be so. In other words, we're not supposed to just take things at faith. Just because, and this is someone who convened with God, that spoke with God, and we see the parables we see these metaphors. And so what it's saying is that even if you believe in something, right, you have absolute faith, and Abraham supposedly spoke to God. He had this personal relationship with God, which, I know the people of faith say we have personal relationships with God, but does that mean is it wrong to question? No, it's not. It's in fact encouraged. So as part of this segment, what I'm going to see if you see the ticker that I have going below on the screen here. So if you have any questions that you'd like to know about Judaism, or just ask me about anything, my opinion on something, feel free to either put it in the comments below on Facebook, or if you're on YouTube, in the comments on YouTube, or if you want to remain anonymous, send me an email to rabbibentley@gmail.com. You can see it right there. It's in it's on the ticker, or if you want to just copy and paste it from the description, feel free to do that. And I will answer your questions at the beginning of each podcast. If we got some really cool questions, or someone comes up with some really cool, maybe you can come as a guest onto the show as well. So that might be a possibility. But the point is that you're not supposed to take anything at face value, right? And I think that's a conversation that we had. We had that conversation on Tuesday with my friend Mark. There is no. It's not a matter of blind faith. Yes, there's this element of faith that you have is it an element of faith in the supernatural? Your belief in God, your personal faith, your personal belief that there is something bigger than us. But at the same time, just because it says something in the Bible, does that make it true? Does that make it? Does that mean that it's supposed to be? That's exactly, you have to take it literally? No, that's not. That's not how Judaism views it. That's why there's a very wonderful tradition, that many Orthodox, many Jews do, is it's called Daf Yomi. So you take a page of the Talmud every day, and you read a page of the Talmud every day, you go through it, you learn it, and what you find is, all these rabbis arguing and questioning each other, and this today actually it's from the tractate Ketubot, which deals with marital issues, which deals with matrimony and the legalities around, it's a Jewish civil law, the legalities around marriage and but going back to ancient times, it was different, but it's still applied today in different marriage laws. But one of those questions is about accountability. It's a question about if someone admits their guilt on something, is that person still liable if they've admitted their guilt? And the rabbis seem to make this whole argument. They go back and forth, and I don't want to get into that because there could be some very, very boring arguments in the Talmud, and some very, very exciting and interesting ones at the same time. Talking about how much you got to pay for your ox that gores somebody, right? Be gorging their horns. Sometimes can get a little dry, but when you get into the depths of it, into the weeds of it, you realize that there is no right or wrong opinion, right? There becomes a matter of consensus, and that's how kind of Jewish law evolves. So anyway, there's no stupid questions. Questions are encouraged. So please, if you have a question, anything you want to know about Judaism, don't feel shy. Just email me privately. Again, there's no stupid questions, and sometimes even the simplest questions can lead to a really interesting conversations. So again, there's your opportunity there. You can see I'm gonna put this email here across on the screen at the bottom of the screen, right down there. You can see it, and just absolutely, I love answering questions. That's that part of that's my little spiel about that. And then also don't forget to like and subscribe if you have a question, and like and subscribe even if you don't have a question. I've been watching some interesting TV shows lately, and I know I like to talk about pop culture, and I'm a huge sci-fi fan, as you know. And I had the pleasure when I was at Comic-Con. This is my second time at Comic-Con, and my second time. And I was a huge fan. I am a huge fan of the Orville still. Although this season to me is kind of getting a little. I'm not so sure about this season. But I saw the panel, and they all seemed rather like, is the show going to get renewed, or is the show going to get canceled? And so I kind of saw Seth MacFarlane was zooming in with his glass of scotch, and you could tell he was a little kind of, the Orville, for those of you who never watched the show, is kind of like, it's like Star Trek meets Family Guy, right? So that was the Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy. And so the first season was it was almost like, oh my God, this is so refreshing. It's like next generation Star Trek, and they're making fun. It's funny like Family Guy. And then we get to this third season, and we know Disney's taken over, right? Disney now owns Hulu. They moved and even you could tell even at the Comic-Con panel, the Seth MacFarlane was like, Disney, my bosses now. And as you're watching the show, you just kind of get to this point where you're like, it's like, well, are they just trying to compete with Paramount to make it more like Star Trek? Because we got Star Trek. If I want to watch Star Trek, I'm going to watch Star Trek. I'll watch the Orville because I like that kind of refreshing, tongue-in-cheek Family Guy. I want to hear Stu. I want to see Stewie on a starship, right? The voice of Stewie, at least. Well, but it's not. It used to be much funnier now. But this episode that we watched today, my wife, they've already got to season 10. But if you get to the episode 6. But there was an interesting concept of time travel. Timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly. And in this episode, Lieutenant Malloy, who's kind of he's kind of the comic relief. We thought that Seth MacFarlane, he's still a little bit of that comic relief. But they had this device on a ship that it started off with a sandwich. It goes back and can go back and forward in time, and then obviously, as you know in these shows, as they get attacked by these aliens, the Kalons, and Lieutenant this lieutenant was sent back into the 21st century to 21st century Pasadena. And so it reminds you of the voyage. Remember the voyage home in Star Trek? Very much like the voyage home in Star Trek. But the dilemma was, so he sent a message, and they get there late. They get there. He said, he waited 3 years like he's supposed to. You're not supposed like the butterfly effect, right? That if you get trapped, so if any of you get trapped into a wormhole and find yourself back in time, you have to hide yourself away. Don't let anyone steal your cell phone because you may affect the future, right? You could accidentally cause it so that your children will never be born. That's the whole concept. So they go back all very, very seriously, but they get back 10 years too late. And long story short, he met the love of his life, and he had 2 children, and Seth MacFarlane's in it, and he was not very Stewie. And I didn't, my wife and I were very disturbed by this because they were like, you have to come home. You cannot affect the time, but I'm going to lose my children. But you can't take me. I don't want to leave. I found a family. I found happiness. You should have come 10 years ago. Where were you 10 years ago? And they forced him to come home, and it was all very kind of dramatic. And then we were kind of left with this feeling of like dissatisfaction, because he was just like, when they explained it to him over a couple of scotches, which is kind of like, they have some scotches in Orville, which was one of the original things that made it funny, was the way they kind of brought that modern that humorous side. How would people really be on a starship? That Star Trek Next Generation was kind of like a little bit cheesy when it came to that, but this season's not really doing that. Although I still love the show, and I want them to. I think maybe the Seth MacFarlane, he just seems like he's like calling it in, maybe, or something. But the point was that, well, so they say he refused to go. He pulls out his phaser and he says, "Go away." I'm not. So they go, "Well, we're going to go back even further, so that your children will never be born. You're the baby that's about to be born, and your son will never be born." And they go back again. And then they do Einstein, they use the Einstein theory because the time machine broke. The question is, why was the time machine there in the first place? Another question. But the time machine broke, so they used Einstein's theory, which we all know is the one big, what's stopping us from going into warp. What is the theoretical idea of why we can't go to warp, right? It's because if you travel faster than the speed of light, as you approach the speed of light, once you travel at the speed of light, everyone it's like everyone you've ever known will have died, right? That's the basic theory that Einstein has. So science fiction have always said, well, there's a bubble around starships which prevent that timey-wimey issue from happening, so that you can travel far distances and stay within your own time period. So that's how they got back. So we're just like, oh, that was kind of interesting. But when they got back, Lieutenant Malloy, I'm pronouncing his name right, he's like, they explained it to him. Oh, by the way, there was this whole family that you would have had that you didn't have because we went back and we made that decision for you. And he was like, okay, that's kind of cool. Let's have another scotch. And that just kind of left me with like, well, that's a moral dilemma, right? What is the moral dilemma there? The moral dilemma is, how do you know what is the right thing to do in that kind of situation, right? Do we know that maybe that was the way it was supposed to be in the first place, right? That's all these questions, I think, and that's the question I think is very interesting about time travel, is the effect that you can have on the future if you travel back in time. And that brings me to, I said, Va Dor, the next generation, the importance of the next generation, and not talking about next generation Star Trek, but next generation in general, right? So there's a concept in Judaism called Yeridat Hadorot, right? Which means the each generation gets devolves. So we don't evolve, we devolve. That things were much better in the past, and again, the rabbis question that: is that really true? Right? Are we devolving, or are we evolving, or have we stayed exactly the same? Right? These are the questions. I personally have faith in humanity. I think that things seem really bad, but there are people that stand up in moments of crises. Right? You can think of them in history. Churchill as a wonderful example, standing up to Nazis. I brought that up yesterday. But there are moments in history. So I believe that we are evolving. But at the same time, sometimes we do devolve, right? Sometimes we do go back, right? History is kind of like it's a wave. It goes down, it goes up. My grandfather of blessed memory, he said to me, grandson, life is like a wheel. Sometimes when you're on the bottom, when you're moving down, life seems like it's all going to shit. And he gets all the way to the bottom, but as the wheel turns, it goes way back up to the top again. So maybe that's what the idea of Va Dor, generation to generation, isn't necessarily that there's a degeneration, but that sometimes there has to be and there's another concept in Judaism called to destroy in order to build. That sometimes things have to go bad in order for things to get better. Personally, for me, I look at, I'm going through some health issues right now, but I look at the things the positive things that have come out of that. So it's not necessarily I'd rather not have what I have, but it has led me to do things that I wouldn't normally have done. That I don't take things for granted anymore in such a way. There are certain behaviors that I've decided, to abstain from. If you that know me, the single malt Scotch, maybe won't drink half the bottle. Maybe just drink one glass of wine, right? Gotta have that glass of wine. It doesn't mean that if I might have a little Scotch now and then, but there are other things too. There are things like this podcast. There are things like recognizing that I want to do another album. And so that goes for me personally, but for people on a greater level, right? You think about we've been going through this pandemic, right? And the January 6th riot. Remember, I was going to talk about Liz Cheney, and I will in a minute. The January 6th riot and insurrection, if you want to call whatever you want to call it. What did it lead to? It led to a realization amongst a lot of people, and certainly Republicans like Liz Cheney realized, well, you cannot, this is a threat to democracy. This is a threat to what this country was founded to be a democratic republic. It's a republic. It's not a democracy in the truest sense of the term. But at the same time, when you see people that say, well, the election was stolen, it was ripped, right? All of that, and do your research, right? The numbers, look at the numbers. The numbers speak for themselves. What research, right? So you go to Fox News, and not knocking Fox News. There used to be some good journalists at Fox News. Haven't watched it in a while, so I don't know. But if you like Fox News, that's all good. I don't mind. I am not judging you. Again, I don't even watch cable news. I think MSNBC is just as biased as Fox News is, just in a different way. But at the same time, so out of all these negative things, you take a positive spin on it, because you can lose that positive. If you lose the positive spin, then you kind of lose the point, right? You lose the point, because making mistakes, and Dylan said this, right? There's no success like failure, and failure ain't no success at all, right? That with our failures we grow. And so I don't believe that there is a generation of the degeneration of the generations, but rather every generation gets better. They learn from the mistakes of history, right? And we have to learn from the mistakes of history, but we have. Even though we do mistake and we do repeat those mistakes of history, I believe that that we are on a roll to making things better. Right, even though that climate change bill didn't go as far as it should have done, that we saw all of the impediments to the progress, the faults of the United States Senate, things are getting better. Right, Beatles, it's getting better all the time. Right, all of that, and so when you see someone like Liz Cheney, Darth Vader's daughter, I'm your father. That wasn't very good, was it? No, I know. But Liz Cheney, so what's she doing now? Well, so Liz Cheney, she started a new organization called The Great Task. And what is that task? It's to stop Donald Trump from being president again. So the question is, should she be doing this? Is she doing this to run for president? Is her running for president just going to guarantee that Joe Biden's going to win again? Or is it going to take enough votes away that will guarantee that Donald Trump will win again? Right. Again, if you have thoughts on that matter, you can always put those in the chat. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that. But so the question is, you've got someone like Liz Cheney. I got to give it up to Liz Cheney, because I think she's really done a lot. We imagine, you think of Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney gets a bad rap, right? Rightly or wrongly so, depending on how you look at things. But Liz Cheney was very brave to give up, and I think she probably knew that she firmly believes that she is standing at a moment in history where you've got to stand up and do the right thing. You've got to stand up and say, this is wrong, right? It's wrong to think that you can just encourage anarchy or encourage fascism or encourage a leader who I believe, and this is my personal belief, I've always believed that I don't think Donald Trump has the best interests in the United States at heart. I think he has his own best interests, right? And the fact that a man like Vice President Pence, who would you have imagined that he would show such courage at that time, the January 6th insurrection, that he really did stand up for democracy, right? Mike Pence. and give it up to Mike Pence, whether I do not agree with his policies, I don't agree with his beliefs, but he's a man of faith who has a conscience and truly believes in the Constitution of the United States, truly believes in that, like Liz Cheney does. And these are leaders in the Republican. These are great leaders. These are great leaders, whether or not you agree with their policies, whether or not you're even going to vote for them, right? I would never vote for Mike Pence, but I respect and admire people like Mike Pence and Liz Cheney because they stand up for what is right. They stand up for justice, tzedek tirdof. And those are moments of history, and all of us have that opportunity at the same time where we can stand up and say when things are wrong. So should Liz Cheney be doing what she's doing? Does she have a choice? Is she doing it out of ego, or is she doing it because, and I believe she's doing it for the right reasons. Whether or not she will succeed, whether or not she just make matters worse, well, that remains to be seen. There's a silent majority out there. There's a lot of people I know who identify themselves as conservatives, and I have a lot of conservative leanings myself in certain areas, especially when it comes to foreign policy. I consider myself more of a centrist, but I'm a conservative in certain areas, in foreign policy and economics. But I also believe in a welfare net as well. And so a lot of people fit in that middle ground. Yet there's that polarization that's occurring. So I believe that we should encourage someone like Representative Cheney to continue the fight, her fight that she believes she's doing the right thing, and I do believe that she's doing the right thing. The question is, strategically speaking, is she doing the right thing? And I believe that's a different question. Talking of people who are doing the right thing, I know I've been ripping on the CDC a little bit, and they're just based on my own experiences. My wife had COVID for it was like 17 days she had it. Whether she was infectious for that whole period is another matter, and that's the issue, because she would call the COVID nurse and she'd say, well, I still feel like this. They gave her the Paxlovid, right? Paxlovid, which does it cause a rebound? Does it make you test? And my pharmacist said, well, actually, yeah, people test positive even if they're not infectious for up to 90 days on the Paxlovid. Thankfully, she's not positive anymore. So, and she hasn't been for a week, or maybe more. So anyone that comes across my wife, no more cooties. Don't worry about the cooties. But so the CDC, when you call the COVID nurse, the CDC would say, they would go, well, the CDC says your husband has cancer, and so the CDC says and you could tell that the COVID nurse was not quite convinced that the CDC was right. And they've been sending all these mixed messages, and I got to give it up to Dr. Walensky yesterday, who said that there needs to be a huge overhaul of the CDC. This is the, instead of just kind of being out there to talk about all these exotic illnesses, we look to them in these times of crises. And that brings me to the episode of the Orville I thought was interesting, was that Lieutenant Malloy, he was during COVID, he knew exactly everything was going to be okay. So even though it looks like everybody is getting COVID right now, according to Orville, everything is going to be okay, right? Someone from 400 years in the future told us that. I believe it. I believe everything I see in Star Trek. I believe everything I read. No, I'm just kidding. But I love, anyway. Sci-fi is an insight into what the future could be. And Dr. Walensky is recognized those mistakes, that idea of accountability. Right? Accountability is something which I think is lacking in a lot of public servants. They don't feel like they're really accountable, and or don't want to be accountable, or they want to blame other people. That victimization idea, the victimization is one of the 15 mental disorders, most common mental disorders, right? That you feel that it's always everybody else's fault, right? I believe that if you were to analyze all these 15 mental disorders, or look it up, Google it, 15 mental cognitive disorders, there are 15 of them. Tick off how many politicians you know, right? Maybe some who are orange, who exhibit those different attributes, right? Those different mental schemas, those mental issues that we try to get over. Now it's okay to have them, but you need to be aware of them. right? But victimization is a good one. It's everybody else's fault, right? It's not my fault. It's everybody else's fault. I'm perfect, right? There's no accountability. Dr. Walensky, who's head of this organization, admits it's not perfect. We have to overhaul it. I've made mistakes. I think Barack Obama admitted his mistakes. That was one of his, I don't agree. Again, this is not someone I don't agree with a lot of his policies, especially when it came to Israel. But at the same time, this was a man who he did take responsibility for his mistakes. Right? He lost during those midterms. He said, I took a slacking. He admitted it. Right? I'm going to do better. And if we don't do that, if we say I'm not going to do better, then we never grow. We always stay where we are. We stay in those ruts. And so I think it's great. I applaud Dr. Walensky of the CDC for her recognizing that they need to do better, because what happens if another strain of COVID comes along that the vaccines don't work again? We need to have the right kind of messaging from our public health officials, that it's not politicized, so that there's an opportunity there. When you're seeing polio coming back, right? These are all issues that need to be addressed, and the first step to do that is to recognize that there are maybe things that we're not doing right, that there are things that we need to fix about our system. And that message of accountability is a message that you see in the Talmud. There's a message that I brought back into that conversation about, someone that admits that they're liable is not necessarily liable then to bring an offering, right? Right? Don't have offerings anymore. But that very idea, though, of admitting your liability, admitting that you made a mistake, is the sacrifice itself. Right? You have to bring a sacrifice, but admitting your mistake is in itself a sacrifice, because it does take it takes a lot of courage to admit that you're wrong. It takes a lot of courage to say, I was wrong there, and I've learned from my mistakes, and I have evolved. And so I'm gonna end with that. I was going to talk a little bit about the Vikings. I finished watching the Vikings. It's a great show. I think it's a very interesting concept in terms of the fight of religion, the impact of religion in government and in the 11th century, and how it hasn't really changed. And so we're going to end up. We'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow. And tomorrow I'm going to again bring in the little bit of the Shabbat Torah portion. It's Shabbat Ekev. And it's Moses' last stand, his last speech to the Israelites before they go into the Promised Land. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. And again, if you've got questions for me, ask the rabbi. If you've got anything, there are no stupid questions. Anything you want to know about Judaism, but we're afraid to ask, you can see my email there, rabbibentley@gmail.com. And then again, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And I'll see you all after the sun sets and the sun rises tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Erev Shabbat, Friday, the beginning right before the weekend. So everybody live long and prosper. And remember, if you're going to travel in time, do so responsibly. Take care, everybody.